Facebook may be coming after us. We want to build a robust website that is even more fun for you to enjoy. You can help with that right now. Well, without further ado, I went out to Miami, Florida, to Trump Doral Country Club, mainly because I knew that one of the speakers was Dr. SimoneGold, and I wanted the opportunity to really sit down and talk to her about what she knew, what she was up against, what was happening now that her career was ruined for telling the truth to America. It was an amazing moment. It was a beautiful, beautiful place to get to sit down. Wait till you listen to what Dr. SimoneGold had to say about hydroxychloroquine, this pandemic, and our future. We are here at Trump's Doral Resort. It's absolutely beautiful. But hailing in the beauty tube, my guest right here, Dr. SimoneGold, such a powerful voice, founder of America's Frontline Doctors, which I call that the single greatest act of censorship in U.S. history that I know of, at least in my lifetime. I'm sure someone could challenge that. But to watch something, you put these doctors together, and 18 million views, is that right? 18 million views within 6 hours. And then YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all shut it down. Is that, I mean, I think that's a record. That has to be a record. I mean, we've had some pretty good viral videos, but 18 million views in 6 hours is pretty astounding.
Yeah, I was told it was the most viral video of all time for the amount of time that it was up. So I was actually excited because I'm not that great a singer.
Why you? Right? I mean, there's doctors all around the country that are doing, I'm guessing, trying things like hydroxychloroquine or ways to deal with their patients, maybe quietly. Some, we've seen a few people try to speak out, but what we've been, what all of us have been thinking is we've got to get doctors standing together. We've got to stop putting one out at a time so that they just, they attack their license and they're all alone. What made you decide I'm going to be that person to bring doctors together on this?
So, as you know, I'm a board-certified emergency physician, but I'm also a Stanford University educated attorney, and I do think I see the world a little bit differently than the average physician. So when I saw the problem unfolding, I was concerned as a doctor, but I was also concerned as a lawyer and a policy person. It was also very clear to me that you had to bring doctors together as a group because there was so much individual censorship, and more than censorship, they were individually attacking physicians, going after their license, their livelihood, their life, their reputation. So it was always clear to me from the beginning it needed to be a group effort. I also wasn't personally invested in this for my own ego. I really wanted this to be a group effort. So I put together just amazing quality people. I actually laugh when they try to say that we're not high quality. It's pretty funny. These are the most intelligent, professional group of doctors that I've met really in my career.
Did you know that there was going to be the level of pushback? Did you expect censorship? Were you, in some ways, I mean, I've actually, I think, sought out censorship in some ways. I sometimes joke I eat censorship for breakfast. When I put out Vax, the goal was to be attacked because that gave it more of a presence. Were you coming from that perspective, or did you really think we're just going to stand in front of a camera and this thing's going to shine around the world?
It's a great question. I did not have the same intent as you. I understand that.
Yeah.
My intention was to bring together a lot of highly qualified physicians and social media. So I, of course, know about censorship. I was not even interested in bringing in the news cameras. I thought that was a complete waste of time. My plan to avoid the censorship was to bring in all the social media influencers, the YouTubers, let them send it out across the airwaves as people watch YouTube anyway for news. That was my intention. I had absolutely no idea that there was going to be the degree of censorship there was. And I have to share with your listeners and viewers, this has to be coordinated at the highest levels across multiple people's different types of interests. There's no way this can happen. The pushback of not letting the American people know the truth and all the good news that we have around COVID is so vast, so uniform, so all-encompassing, it's shocking. I still can't believe it. Again, the doctor and the lawyer and me, we struggle. On the one hand, we have patients who need a medicine. This could be your father, your mother, your brother, your uncle. They need a medicine, and the government is obstructing it. And on the other hand, the policy problems that have ensued since this, things that have to do with our civil liberties, things that have to do with censorship, free speech, free assembly, freedom of religion, They're all in my head, and I said, we need a group effort. And by the way, I have so much faith in the American people, Del, so much faith. We are a people that believe in freedom, liberty, hard work, justice, so we're going to prevail.
I agree. When you were putting it together, were there certain things, was there a story you wanted to tell? Was hydroxychloroquine always going to be the center of the story? Or there was also the discussion of getting kids back to school. You know, when you sat down and said, how I'm going to select the doctors I wanted to talk to, what was the story you wanted this event to tell?
The story for me was not predominantly about hydroxychloroquine. It's a very important piece because it's really a drug that works if you're sick and you need it. But the story was to bring all the truth to the American people. It's literally like my subtitle, Bring Truth to the American People. So we actually had 7 hours of educational materials. Maybe 1 hour of it, or a little less perhaps, was on hydroxychloroquine. That shows you my priorities. We talked about children in schools. We talked about the healthy elderly and middle age. We talked about the frail elderly. We talked about the scientific corruption, the myths and the hoaxes that were going on. We talked about the Lancet article. We also talked about hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir. So we talked about all of it, but it was not predominantly hydroxychloroquine. But the pushback and the censorship has been around hydroxychloroquine.
Yes.
When I tweet about things that have to do with children or schools or masks, I don't get censored. When I tweet around hydroxychloroquine, the censors come out. It's really strange. At every interview I have to say, hydroxychloroquine is FDA approved for 65 years, derives from quinine found in tree bark. George Washington gave it to the troops. This is a non-controversial medication. It's over the counter in much of the world. Why so much pushback on this very innocuous drug? It's bizarre.
It really is bizarre. And I actually, the same week that, they censored the frontline doctors, we lost our YouTube channel 2 days later. And I've been broadcasting the High Wire for over 3 years on that channel. I assume again, it was hydroxychloroquine. We have been covering that from the beginning. And I don't think it's the only treatment out there. It happens to be one that Donald Trump said that he was using at that time, and something that he got behind very early on. But it's interesting because for me, a lot of the work that I do has been about the safety around vaccines and things. A lot of people say I'm anti-pharma, which I'm not. I've had surgeries. I'm glad they're there. I've had anesthesia. There's been times I've needed antibiotics when I was really, really sick. And so I see all the potential and beauty that pharma brings to the world, but we've also got to keep it in check and make sure that all the things are, being done for the right reasons. But what's ironic is someone that, I do a weekly talk show that people would say he's anti-pharma, yet I lose my YouTube channel the moment I am promoting a pharmaceutical product called hydroxychloroquine.
So this was the only time your channel went down?
It's permanently down. It is not. We're in the verge of. We're working on a lawsuit to try and get our YouTube channel back. We'll see how that goes. But it was that same week.
I have heard this. I just want to share with you. I've heard this repeatedly. People that followed me, social media influencers that were tweeting or sending out videos that had to do specifically when I talked about hydroxychloroquine. That's what gets censored. That's what gets taken down. I learned that over the past few months. I didn't know that. There's something very malignant going on in our society that it has to be big pharma because you always have to say who benefits. Mm-hmm. The only one who benefits if you take hydroxychloroquine out of the picture is another pharmaceutical. We can speculate if it's remdesivir and Gilead or vaccines, but some other pharmaceutical is benefiting, and this is what they're silencing.
Agreed. I have a couple theories on it if you want to hear. Number one, I think that, because I've predicted that there was going to be a push to start a vaccine program for adults, that's really what WHO, the world, like a world vaccine program. They all want us in a harmonized vaccine program for the entire world. So I've been saying there's a pandemic coming, that there is going to be, I thought it was going to be Ebola or something like this. I didn't think it was going to be something as trivial as a coronavirus. Not to, discount those that are having a serious problem with it, but it is really quite such a low death rate. I think this thing is blown out of proportion, but it seems to me that the push is really to get us to this mandated vaccine program for adults. The COVID-19 vaccine is going to be what sort of brings in the adult mandate around the world. And I think that we know for emergency use, FDA, they cannot have a product that works, right? You can't have any other option. So I think that's a huge part of it. I think remdesivir is the reason they're getting behind that is because it's so ineffective that they could honestly say it's really not effective enough, therefore we still need the vaccine in an emergency use. But I have another theory beyond it. That's what sort of was driving me. I actually am curious, and this is because after working on the Doctor's television show, watching when something is so attacked or an idea is so attacked, you start thinking there's something else going on here. And my curiosity would be, and this is pure speculation, is that there's something about the description of hydroxychloroquine that is, when I hear doctors talking about it, it's opening up a new way to look at viruses and how to beat them, right? This idea of a product that can open the cell so that we can send in a specific vitamin, in this case it's zinc, but for something else it might be selenium. But this idea of if we can open the cell, we can kill the virus in the cell, then we can wipe it out. To me, it's almost like we may be on the verge of seeing a way to end Ebola, the issues with Ebola, and perhaps Zika, if Zika really is an issue. And, coronavirus, it's almost like it would be it's so cheap. We have found such a cheap way to deal with what are those terrifying illnesses, and pharma wants us in a vaccine program where 7.5 billion people have to take a drug for every issue out there, whereas this would mean only those that really have an issue. And to me, I'm wondering if it's really opening up a new perspective on how we deal with infection.
You have said so many interesting things, Del. Okay, first of all, I started off thinking this was, Gilead remdesivir versus hydroxychloroquine, and I pretty quickly, within a few weeks, said that's not the primary problem, because even though that is a competitor that would benefit, it's a small slice of the market, right? But vaccines is a huge slice of the market. So what I want to say as a doctor is that it's fundamentally irrational to take an untested, unproven, untried, brand new medication of any sort when you have a safe, tried and true medicine that's been around for decades. And the untried one has not also shielded from liability, which means they're not quite as incentivized to get it 100% right, and you really can't get things 100% right. Secondly, it's very different to take a vaccine when you're a healthy person than a medication if you have an illness. So vaccines should be reserved for cases where there's a serious threat. So you right away have to distinguish between lethal and non-lethal illnesses. Then we can discuss it. But when we're talking about a highly non-lethal illness like COVID-19, essentially trivial, I agree with you. In most cases, it's trivial in the sense that you recover and you go on to have your normal life. So is it a nuisance to have it? Sure. So is influenza. I don't want anyone to be sick. It's unpleasant. I don't want to be sick. But will I recover? Yes. So it would not make sense, and as a physician who took the Hippocratic Oath, I would not recommend to an otherwise perfectly healthy person they should take a medication that's been untested, unproven, shielded from liability for non-lethal illness. Let's just get that out of the way. Your point about essentially expanding the market into the adult market is very fascinating because, as you know, vaccines really ratcheted up over the last 20 years. Now perhaps they want to ratchet up even further. I would urge everyone to strongly consider not taking any medication for any condition that's not serious, and that would include a new vaccine. Many physicians I work with do believe that hydroxychloroquine is really the single best medication to have if they're alone on a deserted island. Like, it's that effective. So you've given me pause to contemplate the tremendous opposition of the ferociousness of the opposition, because it does offer tremendous threat to a huge class of drugs.
Huge. I mean, we are talking about, let's look at COVID-19 vaccine. Bill Gates, world leaders are saying we don't get back to normal till we have this vaccine. Essentially, they are saying they want this vaccine for all 7.5, 7.9 billion people. There's no drug that's ever been sold like that, ever. We are talking about somewhere between a 750, if it's $100 a pop, $750 billion payout. I call it the amazing race. This is the most shocking. This payout is going to be the greatest of all times. And so just the other night I was in a debate with a doctor that said to me, well, vaccines don't make any money. I said, oh, that is just not true. It's not true anymore. It used to be the case when there was just an MMR vaccine or something like that. Nowadays, the top selling drug for Pfizer is a vaccine, Prevnar 13. We're seeing a total shift, but the idea of a world that all have to get vaccinated, those are huge.
See, I just want to really emphasize as a doctor, it is irrational to take an untested, unproven medication that is shielded from liability when you're perfectly healthy, and the virus that you're trying to prevent is non-lethal, and you're highly likely to recover from by the CDC's own
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
If you're over, even up to age 70 or over age 70, we're talking 95% survival.
Yeah.
And in younger, healthier people, it's 99%. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. No, and I was when people say you're anti-vaccine, I said no, I'm not. But under these circumstances, under the circumstances of what I know, my chances of survival are amazing. My kids' chances of survival are off the charts. In fact, they are the quickest route for all of us to be safe. Let's go ahead and get to herd immunity, and so all of those things are discussions that I think are finally starting to happen. And I really want to say, I think there have been doctors that were out there by themselves, but America's frontline doctors has, you kicked the door open. Now we have, this petition that's going around, this international petition of scientists. We're moving in the tens of thousands of doctors and scientists now signing their name and saying, yes, these lockdowns are insane. The control of how we treat our patients has got to stop. And so what does it feel like to, go from, I didn't know who you were, were we 2 months out now? I didn't know who you were 2 months ago, and now you're everywhere. Is it scary? Is it exciting?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
It's fantastic. That's the truth. I mean, people wonder how I'm doing, and I'm saying it's so much better to fight than to not fight. There are thousands and thousands of doctors that I stand with. This didn't come out of thin air. There are doctors that contact me from all over Europe, from South America. Most doctors either have no opinion or are kind of gently on our side. And that's because they see the erosion of the doctor-patient relationship, and they see bureaucrats making decisions for doctors. So no matter how they feel about hydroxychloroquine, they're very concerned about just the practice of medicine generally. So I'm so glad to have done, I like that example, like to kick the door open.
Yeah.
There are people smarter than me, brighter than me, scientists, let them come to the front. That's what we want to hear from, for sure. And by the way, we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop. We're going to do another White Coat Summit. We're coming out, we're bringing truth to the American people. That's why I'm here.
Fantastic. Now, you seem very cheery for someone. Am I wrong? You lost your job at the hospital you were working at.
2 hospitals.
2 hospitals.
2 hospitals.
Take me behind the scenes for a second, because it's one thing. First of all, you seem like a really nice person, and even when we know we're going to get into a controversial area, it never feels good to have people you respect and your bosses sit you down and say, "We're letting you go." Can you give me a sense of what that felt like? What was that moment? How did they go about doing it?
Okay, so it was kind of awful. Like, I don't want to minimize it. It was kind of awful. I work at 2 different hospitals as an emergency physician, which is very common. We typically work at more than one. One I was having difficulty with because I was prescribing hydroxychloroquine, and they were very upset. That when I went to the White Coat Summit, they were already upset. The other hospital, it was completely off their radar. It was perfect. There was no problem whatsoever. I never mentioned either hospital by name. And then they both let me go. And I was actually more devastated about the second one because there had been no warning. And their reason for letting me go was, quote, I appeared in an embarrassing video, end quote. So it all had to do with free speech. That was literally the reason. And first of all, it's devastating to me as an American that that's a problem these days.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's a very underserved, underprivileged, poor community that I was working in. Both of them really.
Yeah.
But that one in particular, they don't get board certified emergency physicians. So I couldn't believe it. So on a personal level, I was actually quite scared, right? You're losing your income, you're losing your livelihood. My father's a doctor. I was born and raised to be a doctor. And all of a sudden, what am I if I'm not a doctor? It was very kind of imbalanced.
Do you believe, especially in the second case, in both cases, is pressure coming from somewhere outside of the hospital?
Yeah, they were only responding to social pressure. I'm very well liked, well regarded. There was no reason on earth other than their own internal cancel culture. Media.
Yeah. When you said that the first hospital was not happy with you using hydroxychloroquine, what is the motivation of that? You're showing success. I mean, we think, outside, just lay people that don't work in the hospital system think, man, you're celebrated. If you are having a success rate, which is higher than the rest of the country or every other hospital, hospitals goes, oh man, we've got this doctor, we don't know what she's doing, but her success rate with COVID-19 is beating the standard. That's not the case. Why?
Yeah, so it's bizarre. The most important thing is for people to notice when something's happening that's bizarre. So I'm going on the one hand from being a person who's being applauded every night, right? I'm an ER physician on the front lines. I'm dressed in the PPE. I've got my blue on, my hat, all that. And I go from that to being vilified. It's bizarre. I think that the motivation was simply to go along and to get along. I don't think my medical director cared one way or another if I used the drug or not. But there were payers that are involved. There were insurance companies that were involved that were not covering the drug and were very upset that the patients were being prescribed this and it wasn't being covered. And there was a lot of, it was all political. I have it in texts that it was all political. The hospital doesn't want you to do this. It's against their interest. It had nothing to do with the patient. And I pushed back hard, Del. I said, I've got a woman in front of me. She's short of breath. Her pulse oxygenation is like 90%, right? She needs this drug. No, don't do it. I said, what are you talking about? I must do it. Like, there was never a conflict. So I knew that it was eventually going to come to a head because there's no way I could have backed down.
And then when you treat that person, you saw...
Within hours, like all the other stories.
How is it the head of the hospital doesn't go, my God, that person was heading to a ventilator, which is a 90% then chance of death. You just brought them back. How do they watch that happen and the next day still give you trouble with using hydroxychloroquine?
I want to share with you what it's like to be me.
Okay.
Are you old enough to remember there was a science fiction movie like 40 years ago? I never saw it. It's called Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yes.
Okay, that was my reality. I'd be walking in the hospital talking to people that looked like doctors that thought, and they weren't thinking that the lights were not on. They were not connecting the dots. I don't know. I don't know how you're a doctor with a patient in front of you and you don't do the absolute best. I couldn't do it.
I mean, this is when I worked on the doctor's television show, and I scrubbed into ORs. I've shot many surgeries, and people would always say, if you had one thing you learned while working on the doctors, which, celebrating I met the best doctors in the world, best surgeons, what would you say was your biggest takeaway? And I said my takeaway was that the most talented, groundbreaking surgeons or critical thinking doctors were never being celebrated. In fact, they were always under review. Every one of the most talented surgeons I ever saw that was doing something new, that was less invasive, a better technique, having a higher success rate, it turns out that they were always under review because their peers were turning them in, saying, I don't want to change how I'm doing anything. I don't want to change how I do a brain surgery, even though I'm killing people and you're not.
The way this went down at the first hospital was when I wrote for hydroxychloroquine and zinc the first time, the pharmacist turned me in. And this is what's strange. I'm perfectly good friends with him. We had a perfectly good relationship. He did not think he was doing anything wrong. He was being what I call a technocrat or a bureaucrat. He was doing what he thought was best. But take a step back. He was being a regulatory arm of the state. We have empowered pharmacists to be regulatory arms of the state. It's like an extension of the state police almost. It's really bizarre. We need to get away from empowering bureaucrats over critical thinkers.
Yes.
You're absolutely right that a doctor who's thinking critically is about to get jammed up.
When we hear a lot of it, I'm challenging you. You can answer if you don't want to. That's fine. We're hearing that one of the reasons hospitals are making these decisions is not just bureaucracy, but that remdesivir costs $3,000 and hydroxychloroquine costs like $3. That if you put them on hydroxychloroquine, they're not going to get to the ventilator, and the ventilator is about to pay out $26,000 to the hospital. Is it wrong to think that hospitals are really that greedy that they are risking people's lives to bring in money?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a conscious attempt on the part of people that work in hospitals to do the wrong thing. And I really have thought about this a lot. I think it's a system, and the system is just marching along. And the system is in jeopardy unless you feed the system, the organism. So the hospitals are dependent upon people being sick. I don't think the individual doctors and the individual nurses are doing nefarious work on purpose. That has not been my experience. But they are pressured to a great extent to go along with whatever's in vogue at the moment. The reason I know this, and one of the reasons I started to speak up publicly, was initially there was no problem with hydroxychloroquine. Then there was little negativity when President Trump endorsed it. But we were kind of still left alone. Then all of a sudden we were allowed to use it because there was an emergency use authorization. You could use it and you could use it. But let me explain how my life went. Initially I'd be speaking up for it, like this is in March. Yeah. And people are like, oh, you know, I don't think it works. I'm like, great, that's fine. You don't use it, I'll use it, that's fine. Nobody cared. All of a sudden when it was approved by the government, people were fine. Oh yeah, we believe it, it works. And I said to my peers, well, what changed? Did you change your mind? Did you read a new journal article? Like, why did you change your mind? The answer was always because the government told them. I was like, that's weird. And that was my invasion of the body snatchers moment. Because I thought that these were people who thought for themselves, but it turned out, no, they were not. They were just listening to what other people said. I thought, that's weird. Okay, fine. Then, when they lost the emergency use authorization, which, by the way, you're still allowed to prescribe it, but people misunderstood it. Yeah. When they lost it, all of a sudden you couldn't use it again, and all of a sudden those same people, those same invasion of the body snatcher doctor peers, were saying, no, 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 it's dangerous, it's dangerous. And I said, again, what changed? So you changed your mind from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday? What actually changed? What was your physician clinical understanding that has changed? There was no answer. This is depressing.
When you look at now, like when we look at frontline doctors, it gets shut down on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. What they say is essentially it goes against our community guidelines. I mean, at least that's what they've said to me. I'm assuming you got something similar. And their community guidelines are based on WHO and CDC facts, right? Like we've been fact checked. What does that say about these institutions, the WHO, the CDC, and let's go ahead and throw in the FDA? Do you have a different perspective of those institutions now than maybe you had a year ago?
So first of all, if there's something that drives me, it's a passion for free speech. So I am so offended when we censor anybody on anything. A lot of people ask me about Dr. Fauci's opinions, and I'm not trying to censor Dr. Fauci. I think we need more opinions.
Yes.
The antidote to bad speech is more speech. So the fact that we're censoring anybody, I think, is remarkable. That Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg went in front of Congress to say that I was spreading disinformation. He didn't name me by name, but he said my group of doctors was spreading disinformation. I say to you, Mark Zuckerberg, what residency did you attend? What patients have you seen? What Hippocratic oath did you take? Because I don't think you've taken one. You cannot look at the data and think hydroxychloroquine doesn't work and doesn't have a role. It's impossible. It's impossible. But taking a step back from that, I don't even care if it's effective. I just want to go back to the laws the way they were. It's been safe and FDA approved for 65 years. Why are governors passing rules and regulations that are outlawing hydroxychloroquine in the era of COVID? This has never happened. This should concern everyone. One drug, one situation, can't use it. The FDA came out and said, it was either the FDA or the NIH, said that you shouldn't use it. But they said, no, but you can go ahead and still use it for malaria, lupus, and rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know of any situation like that. We've taken a drug and said it's not safe over here, but it is safe over here.
Okay, but let me challenge something. You keep saying governors. You keep talking about politics. Politicians are not our problem, as far as I'm concerned. Politicians aren't doctors. You're right. Zuckerberg's not a doctor. I could get angry at him for making a decision, but he is referencing the world's renowned scientific bodies, and they're the ones that are pushing this. What is up with them? A governor, how does a governor override when Fauci says, the CDC says that's a dangerous drug, you shouldn't be using it? How does a governor make a decision when his health department says, we're going by WHO guidelines and that's what this is? I mean, we see people marching, millions in Germany now, tens of thousands. I understand maybe 2 million this weekend will be in England marching. And they're railing against their government, but behind that government is the medical establishment that is doing this to us.
So first of all, I do think as a race of Homo sapiens, we have marched for the last 40 to 50 years towards groupthink. So that has infected this as well. There's tremendous financial incentive to go along with a certain worldview. Why the American Medical Association has said we shouldn't use it is beyond me. Why different subspecialty organizations have said this. The Infectious Disease Association says we shouldn't use it. It is, you know, they're going to have to answer someday to a higher power than us. It's just plain unethical and immoral. There's tremendous financial and political motivation to not allow access to the average citizen of a cheap, safe, effective medication, and it's a tragedy. One of the reasons I'm doing this, I don't like the elitist nature of it. I can assure you that there's kings and there are judges and there are congressmen that are all taking this medication I want the average person to be able to take it. It's a little different than what you asked, but because I'm so offended by the fact that the government and the politicians and the pharmaceutical financial interests have blocked it, that I advocate for over-the-counter. It's on my website that you can find a doctor that's hydroxychloroquine knowledgeable and a pharmacist that won't obstruct the doctor-patient relationship. You can do a telemedicine consultation. My website, americasfrontlinedoctors.com. You can bypass the regulations that are blocking you. And in fact, I think everyone should have hydroxychloroquine in their medicine cabinet because this is only a dress rehearsal. So I'm doing what I can to cut through the unethical and immoral behavior on the other side.
What do you mean dress rehearsal?
COVID-19 is not that serious. I don't want that clip to be taken out of context, but the overwhelming majority of people are either asymptomatic or fully recover. If I was America's enemy, I would watch and see how we've reacted to this. We've reacted very badly. We've thrown our Constitution out the window. This is really our Achilles heel as Americans. It begs credulity to think that an enemy of ours is not going to try this again.
Are you saying that you're leaning towards the idea that this currently is a man-made virus or that it could be a man-made virus?
So I don't really have an opinion if it's man-made or from nature, but for sure it absolutely, of course, came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. My personal opinion, again, not based on much but reading, is it escaped by accident. One of the reasons I believe that is that I think if China wanted to unleash this on the world, they would have already had their population kind of immunized either with hydroxychloroquine, which works like a vaccine, or an actual vaccine. They would have been more prepared. They also suffered some from this. They unleashed suffering on the world, but they also did. But that's my best reason why I think it was unleashed accidentally. I'm less interested if it was man-made or not. But the fact that it can be used as a weapon, whether it's man-made or natural, whatever, it can be used as a weapon for sure.
Very interesting point you make. We have sort of shown our weak spot, right?
Absolutely.
The most powerful nation in the world will run around, will destroy. I mean, and I just said this, I think yesterday on the show, I don't forget what day it is now, but is that, Trump got up and said, I have survived COVID-19 now. Get out, live your lives, don't let this control you. And I said that was the exact same language that we had after 9/11. We cannot let terrorism think that it owns us. We cannot change our way of life, and we stood because if we showed that weakness, it would be like paying off a terrorist, which we've had issues. We don't do that in America because we don't ever want to say that works for you, right? And so we stood up after 9/11 and said, no matter what. I lived in New York City. I was there when it happened. And as New Yorkers, we said we are going to go through our daily lives. We are not going to run. We're not going to hide. We're going to get on subways, even though there were anthrax threats and this and that. Yet this time, we're doing this differently. We're hiding, right? We're terrified.
So I actually grew up in New York, and I was also in New York around 9/11, and our reaction was completely different, right? Our reaction in 2020 has been to throw the Constitution out the window and to show that we're willing to collapse for anything. I say something with tremendous sadness when I say, if I was America's enemy, I would take note that Americans, the way to beat them, never cut off their food supply, but everything else is on the table. You can stop their freedom, you can stop their constitutional rights, you can stop religion and assembly and free speech. Make sure you give them Burger King. Once you do that, they will be compliant with anything. That's scary.
Very scary. Right, you also have a legal background. What are your plans moving forward? Are you going to are you going to try and go after the hospitals that have fired you or those that are really attacking hydroxychloroquine or ways that doctors are really not free to take care of their patients right now?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Doctors are not free to take care of their patients. There's several lawsuits that are going on. There are lawsuits against my former employers, but to the extent I bring any lawsuits, it's really for the greater message that's out there. We need to stop this medical cancel culture. It's dangerous. I don't name my hospitals because I don't have a particular grudge against my hospitals. I think any hospital in USA would have done the same thing, which is terribly tragic, and we need to show that it's going to be expensive to do that sort of thing. All right? That's one. There's a lot of defamation lawsuits that are going on. I'm very interested in pursuing the censorship angle. We have some very brilliant legal minds, if I have to say, working on that censorship angle. I will say over the next several years, I'm going to devote most of my time to stopping big tech censorship. And finally, we're going to be bringing a lawsuit against Governor Newsom.
All right. Can they help? Can people get involved and help you in these efforts?
Yeah, these lawsuits, especially the one against Newsom, are really for the people. They're to stop the executive branch, the governor, from taking too much power away from the people, which is the state legislature. So that's what it is to stop Newsom pulling back from his tyranny. So please consider donating. Again, you go to americasfrontlinedoctors.com. Please just donate.
So there you have it. Go to americasfrontlinedoctors.com and help. And we talk about how so many of you are making the high wire possible. But we've got to, there's so many of you out there that have done very well in life too. Or those that you may just give up a cup of coffee, over the next month and start donating to things that you think can make a difference. You'd be surprised how much just a small donation, when everybody that is watching this video gets involved, we can change the world. So I really want to urge you to help Dr. Gold out in this effort, because California's a disaster. I moved out of there last July. It was feeling bad then. Now I just can't believe what's going on. You have a book coming out. What's the book called?
Yeah, it's called I Do Not Consent, My Fight Against Medical Cancel Culture. And we really need to stop the cancel culture. We need to ensure people's right to free speech, and that includes the right of doctors to talk to patients, patients to talk to doctors. And also in times of confusion like we're facing with governors taking too much power, we need to go back to the Constitution, and it talks about that a lot as well.
Who are the most important people? Like we're seeing millions standing up in Germany, just the masses. We're seeing protests all over this country, really. There was a great protest we were at in Austin, a great event. Is that more important than seeing, do we need doctors to step up and really speak out, scientists, politicians themselves? Who do you think are like the linchpin to change, to getting back to free speech? Who really is your message for right now?
Yeah, it is really and truly for the American people. I don't think the answer can come from a class of people like doctors. It's very scary, I think, for doctors to buck the system at all. They have their own employment, their own lives, their own professional. You have to understand, the governor threatened me if I prescribed hydroxychloroquine. It wasn't just my hospital. That's what's happening to doctors all over the country. The answer must come from the American people. And they have to do this, we have to organize as much as possible. It's quite difficult because they censor us online. That's mostly how we congregate. You've got to go out into the streets. You've got to find allies. You have to rebel against rules that conflict with the Constitution. We have inalienable rights. There is no law that says you have to cover your face. We don't live in a country that has required any type of clothing. We live in a country you can be practically naked walking in the streets. And all of a sudden people are complying with something because an executive, one governor has said so. People need to rebel to the extent they can. I'm realistic. If you have to go on a plane like I do put the mask on. I must comply in that sense. Yeah. Short of that, you must not comply with things that violate what you know to be unconstitutional.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Dr. Gold, I really appreciate you taking this time. It's an honor to meet you. We've been wanting to sit down with you since we saw this amazing event you put together. I know there's more to come, so our prayers are with you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Wow, that was awesome. Dr. SimoneGold, wherever you are out there in the world, thank you for that incredible time to sit down.